Hi everybody, Dana Litwin here again, and welcome back to Tuesday Tips for Leaders of Volunteers. This week is Giving Tuesday. That's the name for kind of the start of a big fundraising season for a lot of organizations, nonprofits. It's the Tuesday after American Thanksgiving, which is when this video is coming out. And I'm really updating another Tuesday Tips I did a few years ago on this topic and really expanding it with more research and more relevant information now that we're a few years into a pandemic and a lot of political strife and economic difficulty that's really changed some of the trends and patterns of volunteering and donating. The pandemic and politics has created a lot of broken trust in institutions and in individuals. And I strongly believe, and this has been proven over and over again in my career and with colleagues' work as well, that trust is the currency for donors, for volunteers, and for successful community engagement in general. So rebuilding trust takes time and intention, and it could take longer if your organization did things during the pandemic or has had bad PR for any other reasons. Do they deserve the trust to be rebuilt? That may be beyond your capability running the volunteer program, but because you run the volunteer program, you probably have more headcount than everybody else. And so the good news about that is that the work you do can have a really positive ripple effect on the organizational culture because you're in charge of the most people. So if you're shifting priorities during the pandemic as an organization, you have to recognize that donors and volunteers have also had very changing priorities. Time and talent may be donated in a different way. That's certainly true generationally with younger Gen Z or younger millennials. And there's also been, in the last few years, more awareness of how traditional philanthropy can very often just be a cynical tax shelter scheme and can perpetuate income inequality and can create more harm than good with barriers to getting grants, jumping through hoops, unequal or blatantly bigoted or biased as practices from funders and things like that. Vu Lee has a great bunch of articles, I'll link to them in the description below as well, on kind of getting over and publicly shaming foundations or corporations that make it way too difficult to get grants. But an easy solution, which I talk about in my previous video on Giving Tuesday a few years ago, is that there's a really easy overlap between volunteers and donors. Most volunteers are at least 10 times more likely to also be a donor than if you're doing cold calls or trying to fundraise out in the community without a relationship or a connection. It's also really helpful if you are fully coordinating your volunteer activities, not just around the holiday season, with fundraising and development and marketing for your organization and having that integration and alignment all year round so that volunteers are understood and respected both as donors and working in fundraising themselves. We often share volunteers between departments, especially in a fundraising season. And the newer research has shown that both research from the Do Good Institute, Generosity Commission, and the Institute for Strategic Volunteer Engagement, and I will link to all of those articles below and some of the videos I've already done about that above here, shows that donors are willing to fund and give more resources towards volunteer services if they are asked explicitly to do so, and if your organization has the data, the information, the metrics to back up the positive impact that volunteer services has on the mission. So if you're integrating volunteer services, volunteer database and records with development department database and records, and there's a good understanding and cooperation and coordination between departments, that's also going to help you get the data to make the case to get more funding for the organization overall, and specifically for earmarked for volunteer services from foundations and corporations and philanthropic groups that are kind of keeping up with modern times and realizing and changing the way that they're funding things and making it easier to fund things when they have the good data to support the point of volunteer services. take a step further and also tell all of your volunteers a few fundraising message points. I kind of call it the elevator pitch. And I think really everyone in every organization, nonprofit, government agency, etc., should have an elevator pitch, 30-second conversation. Some volunteers who are more ambassadors or dealing with the public, more interacting with the rest of the community, or are themselves project leaders or community leaders, they should be able to have at least like a 3 to 5 minute deeper conversation about how to be a volunteer, how to support the organization's work, how to donate, if there's something folks should vote for, things like that. Everyone should have at least the basics of that information so that everyone is empowered to have that conversation with potential donors and other potential volunteers. And how trust as currency comes into play is that people trust people that they already know and like, and it's easier to start with your volunteers being ambassadors for fundraising because they're already very well connected to the organization, and again, they themselves are likely not just to donate their time and their talent, but volunteers in general are much more likely to also be donors of cash or bequeathment, in-kind services, things like that. If you and the director of development or other fundraising or PR peers in your organization, if you do that collaboration and share that data, you can really find not only specialists within your volunteer talent pool and donors, but that helps expand that circle of trust, that currency of trust builds on itself out into the rest of the community. So if a donor, if a volunteer is having a positive experience with your agency, they're going to talk about that. If someone's having a negative experience with your agency, they're going to talk about that too. So if you're doing something to rebuild trust or make trust stronger, that really is the relationship building currency of our profession. I hope that you do have a successful Giving Tuesday and fundraising season. Again, I'm going to put a lot more research papers and results in the video description below if you want to have a deeper dive into current trends from research by the Do Good Institute, by the Generosity Commission, and the Institute for Strategic Volunteer Engagement. All that information is below. I hope you have a great rest of the week, and we will see you next time with more Tuesday tips. Take care.